Что это такое? Машина новая?
Nikita Skrabin on a school trip to a car factory in Munich, 2018. Boys banter in a BMW.
Да вот заехал на завод БМВ. Правда, еще номера не выдали.
The young man oblivious to what the future had in store. That he'd dance outside his school in Vilhivka, east of Kharkiv, on his graduation day, be accepted to study law at university. No way of knowing that Russia would invade Ukraine, that the school he danced outside would be destroyed in the fighting. Nikita had no idea that on the 27th of March 2022, he'd be assaulted, bungled into a car, and would disappear for months on end. We first came across Nikita's story in May last year, 3 months into the invasion. His friends explained that one afternoon he was taken by Russian soldiers near his home.
Никита был здесь. Он приблизительно метров 500, здесь через поле. Проходил домой и в районе садика там пропал.
At the time, everyone assumed the worst. But then, 3 months after his disappearance, Nikita's mother found out via the International Committee of the Red Cross that he was alive. He was in prison, somewhere in Russia.
Но при этом местонахождение его и связи я с ним не могу держать. При этом даже адвоката его не допускают до него. Никто не знает, где он.
Nikita's mother managed to find a lawyer in Russia to represent her son. The Russian Ministry of Defense responded to correspondence from that lawyer. In the letter, they say Nikita was detained for opposing the, quote, special operation in Ukraine, but Nikita's family say he was not involved in the resistance. The letter doesn't detail any charges per se, and says no information will be forthcoming until the, quote, necessary checks are carried out. They describe Nikita's health condition as satisfactory, a word that doesn't cut it for his mum.
У него плохое зрение. Я не знаю, дали ему очки эти, не дали ему очки эти. Сейчас мороза, есть у него вещи какие-нибудь или нет. Я ничего этого не знаю.
Ukraine and Russia regularly swap prisoners of war, soldiers, like here last week. The position of civilian prisoners, though, is far more precarious. Take this example. Back in October, while filming the aftermath of a missile strike on a residential block in Zaporizhia, we were approached by a police officer at the scene, a relative of a young man called Serhiy Yukhnych. Back in April, the 25-year-old was taken off the street by Russian soldiers in the village of Bilozerka in occupied Kherson. He too ended up in a Russian prison. Prison officials allowed him to write to his mother, but not to disclose his location.
Здравствуйте, моя дорогая мамуля. Пишет вам ваш дорогой сын Сережа. Я жив, цел и здоров. Нахожусь в плену на территории Российской Федерации. Проверялось для чого проверялось? Тобто проверяли для того, щоб в даному письмі не було указано нічого лишнього.
Oh, I see. So that stamp is from, it says, the inspector who checks all the letters.
Yeah.
So that is basically the official in the Russian prison that says it's okay for this letter to be sent. According to Serhiy's family, he was not fighting, nor was he involved with the resistance. He just worked in a coffee shop. But here's the thing. Some weeks after his capture, the young man was presented by the Russians on social media as a Ukrainian soldier who had surrendered. Which raises the question, are the Russians arresting civilians in an attempt to enhance their bargaining position when it comes to POW swaps? Serhiy's relative believes so. With family still in occupied Ukraine, he spoke to us anonymously.
Чого не міняє, то що він, будучи російські війська, порушили Женевську конвенцію. Тобто вони взяли просто його в заручники. Він не військовий взагалі, він не може знаходитися в полоні.
So how many Ukrainian civilians are currently languishing in Russian prisons? How many Nikitas and Serhis? The International Committee of the Red Cross has received 45,000 requests from Ukrainians whose loved ones have disappeared. Now, multiple requests may relate to one person, but we're talking about thousands and thousands of people. People like Nikita, lives that one day are full of aspiration and promise, then the next, all that hope confined to a prison cell.
Porrick O'Brien with that report. And if you had difficulty reading the subtitles, a dubbed version will be available later on our website. Now, joining me now is Sir Howard Morrison. For a decade, until 2021, he was a judge for the International Criminal Court and is now the UK's independent advisor to the Ukrainian Prosecutor General. Thanks very much for coming on the programme. Let's start off with some clarity about the issues of civilians being captured and taken by the Russians. If that is happening, that is a war crime, is it not?
Yes, I mean, we start off with the premise that this is an illegal war, an illegal international armed conflict. But supposing there was a justification, under the Fourth Geneva Convention, you're only permitted to intern or detain protected persons, that is civilians, for what is known as imperative reasons of security. And it's up to the people who are doing the arresting to justify that reasoning. It must be carried out in accordance with a regular procedure which would be permissible under international law. And crucially, they must permit access by the International Committee of the Red Cross. Access must be regular and can only be refused for reasons of imperative necessity, and even then, only as an exceptional temporary measure. But that assumes that there was a valid or good reason for arresting the two young men we're talking about, because it seems to me that on the face of the report, and I don't know the details beyond that, this is a fundamental arbitrary detention, which is an abuse of judicial or quasi-judicial process, and hence we have the writ of habeas corpus. Okay,
and we don't know the Russian response to this, but is it possible, as has been suggested in the report, that these people are being captured by the Russians to be then used as bargaining chips in some kind of prisoner exchange?
Well, you can't rule that out, let's put it like that. I mean, obviously there is an advantage in having more people to swap, to get more of your people back. But Russia is a signatory to both the Geneva Conventions and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights that governs fundamental human rights. So if they're doing that for reasons other than the imperative military necessity, they are committing an offence under international law.
And just briefly on this specific case of Serhi, who worked in a coffee shop and then suddenly popped up on social media wearing a military uniform. I mean, again, what's your reaction to that?
Well, we all know it's extremely easy to transpose somebody's face by technology and make them look as if they're wearing a uniform, which they're not. And if that's been done, one would presume it is to support that he is a soldier and therefore subject to an exchange of prisoners. In a sense, it's maybe to his personal advantage if he is regarded as a prisoner of war, because that invokes the protections of the Geneva Convention.
Right. Just on the wider question, I mean, you're advising the Ukrainian government on this. I know that they have been collecting evidence from the very beginning in order to put cases to the International Criminal Court. How likely is it that we will ever see some of the big fish, senior generals, political leaders, Putin himself, actually end up in the dock?
Well, that's always been the million-dollar question. The reality is that the ICC cannot hold trials in absentia, so it can only try people who actually come before the court, which is why there is talk of a special ad hoc tribunal, but even that would require the ability to hold trials in absentia, because they're not going to get a senior Russian voluntarily any more than the ICC is. But under Ukrainian domestic law, you can try the crime of aggression and you can hold valid trials in absentia. So there are means available. And there's a lot of discussions going along as to how this might best be done. But as I've said before, when I was a judge at the International Court for the former Yugoslavia, we were told we'd never get Milosevic, Mladic or Karadzic. And we got all three.
You got all three. Got to leave it there. So Howard Morrison, thank you very much indeed